Hi everyone, welcome back. It is a weirdly personal episode. If you haven't joined one of these before, there's no guest. It's just me yapping, riffing on whatever weirdness has floated into my life this week. It's been a little bit quiet around here. We missed an episode a couple of weeks ago, you might have noticed. And that's because I'm doing big planning for 2026. So we're actually going to move towards seasons. I'm going to announce all about this on the Instagram, and I'm also going to want loads of your feedback. So I'm thanking you in advance, hoping that you will answer all my polls, all my questions, and help me shape what the next season of the Weird Years is going to look like. It's also been a little bit quiet because I've been incredibly busy arguing with men on the internet, if I'm honest. And actually, that is what has inspired today's chat. So productivity came from it. Today, we're going to talk about arguments. We're getting into the arguments which are worth having in your 30s and which ones are definitely not worth your time. Because let's be honest, I think the older we get, the less capacity for bullshit we have and the less energy we have to be having pointless arguments. And we also get into how to argue better. And I want to caveat that arguing better doesn't necessarily mean winning. And we're going to get into all of that. If life feels like a whirlwind of clarity and confusion, pull up a chair. Welcome to the Weird Years. So what have I been arguing about recently? To be honest, I think I'm not someone who argues that much in my day-to-day life. I don't generally get that bothered by things. I also think at this point I'm surrounded by a lot of people who, they don't really piss me off, so I don't have to argue that much. But an argument I have been in recently, actually, that came to mind in brewing this episode, is with arguing online in the comments. There was an influencer, her name is Valeria Lipovetsky, I think is how you say it, and she has a podcast, she had her husband on. They had this clip which was talking about how there's changes now that sometimes women take men's surnames in marriage. And she was kind of saying like, things have changed, maybe like this isn't like such a big deal. And he was going, it's ridiculous. And being like very, in my views, very like not open-minded and quite pig-headed about it. This idea that a man might take a woman's surname when they got married. Let's actually listen to the clip. I'm going to play the clip now so you get the context of what I'm arguing about.
Why would a man take a woman's last name? That's just nonsense.
But do you think that maybe time has changed and people are going to kind of like, you have the choice, okay, I'm going to take her name or his name?
That's ridiculous.
Ridiculous. In theory, I feel like with the progress that we've had in the world, I'm thinking, yeah, whatever, everyone can do whatever works for them. But in reality, I think that women will look down on the men that will take their last name.
I think that if the world is going to a point where, men are taking women's last names, I would say, let's get the AI to take them out.
And I was like, to me, that's such a wild thing to care about because it's obviously such a hypocrisy. Like the fact that her husband was saying, okay, it's so ridiculous that a man would take a woman's name. I was like, okay, well, why is it not ridiculous that a woman takes a man's name? Like a man's name. Anyone who has any idea of history knows that marriage goes back to land ownership. It's about transferal of property. It's about wealth division. And ultimately, it's about a level of ownership of a woman and therefore the estate that you've married into or you bring into your marriage because of land ownership. So to me, I was just like, I just left a comment. What did I actually say? I said, can he give any reason why it's ridiculous for a man to do this, but not ridiculous for a woman to do? Like any actual argument why? Why is it a valid statement? I'd be interested to hear. Because I often am interested to hear because I think sometimes when you poke people for their like rationale on something, and if someone pokes your rationale on something, sometimes you actually have never really like questioned that thought that you have. Like it's just a kind of default state of mind or a default thought that you've had and you've not actually put any like, new thinking into it. So I think it's always good to examine like these beliefs that we hold, especially if you're fucking putting them out on social media. I do feel like if you're going to put a very purposely divisive statement like that, at least have like a good point of view behind it. Anyway, I put that out thinking maybe we'd get that. And about 2,700-ish people liked the comment. Obviously, there was lots of people who liked the comment. There was also lots of people who jumped in with lots of rationale around men taking women's names, is feminism gone too far, blah, blah, blah. What else came up? A lot of men need to be men and women need to be women. A lot of men are leaders of the house and therefore it's important for them to have everyone in the house under their name. And obviously, like, I dipped in and out, right? I was kind of like, guys, if you need to have someone's name to be able to respect your family then and to provide for them, then you're not a good dad, you're not a good man, like you're not a provider. If you like cannot, there's no way I could deal with that child if they had a different surname to me, then you're just a moron in my view. Anyway, I argued back and forth for this for a while. And you might be like, at this point, Liz, you're really waffling. Can you just get to the point of the story around arguing? The reason that I tell you that story is because it really got me thinking, like, how are these arguments important? Like, when should I jump into something and put in a point of view? Because I think it's actually important to add to the conversation versus when should I not have those arguments? And then I started thinking it from a social realm, like social media, blah, blah, blah. But then I got thinking, even with like friendships, with family, with relationships. And it just made me spend a lot of time in the last week sitting down and thinking about arguments. I think it's really important to think that being good at arguing or knowing when to argue is not just about winning. To me, it's about conflict resolution, and it's about working things through, right? Being good at arguing is not about winning, because you can win in lots of manipulative different ways if you want to. You can manipulate people's psyche. There's loads of research around it. Like, that's not necessarily a good outcome for you or the person who you're chatting to. And you might find that in your 20s, I definitely found this, the arguments were a lot more like chaotic and emotional, a lot more driven by ego, a lot more driven by like the hurt that you have in your life. And there's kind of this nice thing that happens in your 30s that you realize that energy is really precious. And actually you don't have all this energy to just argue left, right and center. You don't have energy to argue around like shit that might not change. And that is not to say that in your 30s you want less conflict. I actually don't think that's the case at all. I think in your 30s you want better conflict. And one thing I'm going to say before we get into this is that if you're listening and being like, well, I actually never argue at all, conflict avoidance is also not good for you. It's not a badge of honor. If you are unable to have arguments, to have discussions, it's probably not going to work out for you. I hate to say it, but it's not going to be the best route. And as we talked about at the beginning, energy is precious. Time is precious. I'm going to call these my 5, like, don't fucking bother with these kind of arguments list. It's catchy. So number 1, and this is a little bit eating my own medicine. Is that what the expression is? I think so. It's trying to convince complete strangers of your worldview or your point of view. And when I say total strangers, I mean people that you like barely know. It could be trolls in the comments. It could be like an elder family member who you really don't see very much and actually they don't impact your life. If you barely know that person and your whole point of the argument is that you want them to believe the thing that you believe, 90% of the time it is not worth your time. And why I say this is partly like the format. I think if you're arguing on social media, generally social media is not a great place to have arguments because it's so short form. But also you don't actually know anything about that person that you're arguing with. Or if it's in your day-to-day life, it might be that you don't know anything. You don't know enough about that person to make the argument worth having. And we'll come into that later, because who the person you're arguing with is a massive factor of like whether it's going to be productive and useful, move you forward, or whether it's not at all. So if you're like, okay, I am spending energy trying to convince this person who I don't really know of my worldview, on the whole, just don't really do it. Don't bother. I put that in my don't fucking bother list. My second one in the don't bother is fighting with someone who does not have the ability to change or the ability to apologize. If you know this person has never apologized or changed their behavior because of an argument in the whole time that you've known them, there is no point in having that argument. And I know this is like a difficult pill to swallow, because it's like, well, you have to test it a few times to know whether that person is flexible if they're not. But ultimately, you just have to get to a point where you either accept a situation or you walk away, because there will be arguments, a great one, for example, you might have a family member who smokes, for example, and you really care about their health and you really want to change their mind. You want to like get them to understand that like this is really difficult for you and you're really worried about their health, but you've been having this argument for like 5 years. If you've been doing the same thing over and over, sometimes you have to just know like, okay, that is an argument I'm not going to win. I've said my piece and I'm going to move away from it. I'm going to leave it. Another one is, as I said, if someone doesn't have the ability to apologize, sometimes you really need an apology. And again, if that person is so stubborn in their own kind of will that they will not sort of own what they've done and apologize, you have to decide, okay, is this something that I can say, like, it is what it is, I'm going to maintain this relationship? Or is it something you go, actually, no, this is so damaging and you're unable to apologize, and I could argue with this week after week and it's not going to change? If that's the case, you need to break off from that friendship or that relationship, because all it is going to do is drain you. If you cannot change it, you have to accept it. If you cannot accept it, you have to change. That is the rule. The number 3 is debating choices with people whose lives you don't want. I think it's really important to be discerning when you're going to engage in an argument of, like, does this person actually have something that I would like and something I respect in my life? Maybe they have a great relationship. Maybe they have a great career. Maybe they, I don't know, have founded an amazing company. Maybe they have something that you respect them for and it's relevant to what you're talking about. And therefore you feel like you could find some kind of shared knowledge in having this argument, whether it's difficult or not. Then great, have the argument. If you're moving into an argument with someone whose lifestyle you don't want, then just leave it. Leave them to their own devices. For example, when I'm arguing with people on the internet or in real life, like, I don't want a completely traditional, using heavy quotation marks, because what does that even mean, relationship with a man where it's like he makes all the decisions and I don't make any of them. That's not what I want. And if that person has that life, I'm not going to try and convince them that that is the life that I have and therefore it's better, because ultimately I don't want their lifestyle. So what's the point? Let them live, let me live, move on. Don't get into those arguments. Number 4 is very difficult because it rolls into a level of care, but it also often rolls into arguments. And I think you will feel this, is arguing to try and fix someone who doesn't want to be fixed. And this can come in loads of different forms, and it can be incredibly fucking painful to stop arguing to try and change someone who doesn't want to be fixed or help someone who doesn't want to be fixed. It can happen in addiction, it can happen in illness, it could happen in reckless behavior, it could happen like when you're telling your girlfriend's advice around like a partner and it gets heated and it's like it becomes an argument, but ultimately they don't want to accept your help and it turns into an argument. You really need to walk away from those arguments because it's only going to drain you. And again, if someone is not open, they don't have the mental flexibility, they're not in the right state to accept help, all you're going to do is argue and nothing is going to change. I think we really need to remember this whole thing is the whole point of arguing is not to win, it's to resolve something. It's conflict resolution, right? It's to find an outcome which is better for both of you. That is the goal. You should not be arguing to be like, well, I won and that's that. And you leave the other person feeling fucking awful. Because yes, you can win arguments like that. You can shut someone up if you want to. You can be incredibly mean if you want to. But to me, arguing is conflict resolution. And you should always go into every single argument of like thinking that, like the outcome of whether this is worth it and whether we've done a good job, which sounds so weird to say, in arguing. It's like, did we resolve the thing? If you didn't resolve the thing, you haven't done a great job. So if someone does not want to be fixed, then even if it comes from a place of love, you cannot keep having these arguments. I heard a really good podcast the other day, which was Lou Teasdale, I think her name is, who is a hairdresser who was good friends with Caroline Flack, like her best friend. Caroline Flack being the TV presenter who sadly took her life a couple of years ago now. I think it was 2020, maybe 2021. And she was on a podcast talking about Caroline Flack to Paul Bronson and how she was fighting, trying to A, support Caroline, but also to help her like move forward, to feel better. And sometimes it felt like conflict, it felt like arguments. And she said this amazing thing which really stuck with me, which was just like, sometimes you do not have the, like, it's not you in your capacity to help someone. And that's often where arguments happen, is that you want to help them. You're trying every way you can. They're pushing back because they're not ready. But actually, it's not really in your skill set to help someone. If, for example, someone's in an abusive relationship or someone is abusing drugs or whatever, there comes a point, even if they're depressed, like those kind of things, you can help and help and help. But there comes a point where like you will end up arguing because you're frustrated that nothing's changing. And ultimately you don't have the skill set to help that person. Like you're not a therapist. You're not a drug rehabilitation specialist. You are not a suicide hotline. Like you are not able to do that stuff because you're not trained. And that's okay. And at some point you have to accept like, I don't have the ability to help this person and I'm not going to argue on it. And I'm just going to step away from trying to change it. And I know that's really difficult. I actually, if you've been in this situation, do drop into the comments because I'd love to chat about it more, because I think it's a very fine line between helping into conflict, into arguing, and often like the people that you love the most, the people you argue with, because you're like, I just want to fucking help you. And it's not always possible. And you have to know where your limitations are. And number 5 is arguing for validation. We did a whole episode on validation a month or 2 ago. And actually you guys really enjoyed it. So I appreciate all the listens, all the messages around that. When you're arguing for validation, you're arguing because you want that person to agree with you. You want them to say what you did or what you've decided is good, it's great. Okay, let's think of like an argument for validation. It might be something like, we did an episode actually also on this with Chloe, about leaving a job when you're doing really well. She was very lucky that her whole family like supported it. But let's say you go, I'm going to quit my job. It's really well paid and it's very like high status and my family love bragging that I do this thing, but you know it's not right for you and you need to leave that job. You might find yourself arguing like with your parents or with a friend or with family who are going like, no, this is the best thing for you. You need to do this. And you're arguing back for validation because you care about their opinion, right? You want them to agree with the choices that you've made in your life. So you're arguing like, no, this is like, it's the best thing for me that I leave, blah, blah, blah. You're only really arguing. You're going to do what you're going to do anyway. You're arguing because you want their validation of saying this was the right decision. And what's really rooted, if you take away the layers of that, is self-doubt. It's that you're not completely like in your own world. You're needing that validation from somebody else to tell you that the thing that you're going to do or you have done was the right thing. It's really difficult because obviously you want people to agree with what you're doing. You want people around you to support your choices, but ultimately arguing solely for the sense of validation, of being right, of convincing them, it's not worth it. You have to be secure in your choices, even if other people disagree with them. So those are the 5. Let's do a little recap. So we had trying to convince someone you barely know to see your point of view, fighting with someone who can't apologize or does not have the ability to change, debating lifestyle choices with people whose lifestyle you don't want, you don't respect, you don't look up to, trying to fix someone who does not want to be fixed, and then arguing for validation. Those are really what I came to when I deep dived into my own life and thinking about arguments with friends, all sorts of things, and friends who've told me about arguments with their friends. And even today, actually, a friend came to me with an argument, well, not an argument actually, with a topic they wanted to raise with a friend, and they were asking how I would navigate it. And I was thinking about it through these lenses, and I think it was really useful. So I hope you guys find that useful as well. Ultimately, if the argument, the conversation, the debate costs you peace, but actually changes nothing, then don't bother doing it. It is a pointless task. It drains your energy. Don't do it. However, let's move into part 2 of this. Some fights are worth having. Some fights are absolutely worth having. I'm not saying that in a like catch these hands, catch me outside vibe, but some fights are worth having. They are important. They, as we said at the beginning, that they resolve conflict. They are fights that lead to conflict resolution. The alternative of never having the difficult conversation, never having the difficult argument, is that you don't resolve the conflict and you avoid it. And we all know, we all have boomer parents, right? We all probably have parents or grandparents who have never resolved a thing, an argument, a challenge in their life, and it just haunts them and it continues to play out in their lives day to day. So there are fights that are worth having. There are fights that will conflict resolve. Conflict resolve? They will resolve conflict. So we're going to get into those. I have 4 that I think a fight's worth having. And then there's one that's like a bonus because it kind of is worth having, but there's a big caveat. So we're going to go into that as well. So these are the 4 fights that I think are worth having because, as I said, they create conflict resolution. Ultimately, they create growth, clarity, connection, or smoother relationships. And there's 4 of them with a little bonus. The first one is values-based arguments. These are arguments, they might be around things like how you use money, how you use time, how effort and honesty comes into relationships. These are arguments around fundamental values. And I think those are really important to have. If you have fundamentally different values that are played out in your life day to day, let's take money, for example. You have an argument around money. It's never going to show up as an argument around money. It's not going to be like, oh, we have fundamentally different values around money. It's going to show up as your friend is always booking the most expensive restaurants, and then you have to go and you end up spending 100 quid every time you go out for dinner with them. And you're like, fuck, this person does not think about me when they book restaurants. Then it's going to come up down the road with, I don't know, you paid for something on behalf of a group, and that person 5 months later has made no effort to pay you back because you have fundamentally different views of money. That fundamental value will pop up in arguments in so many different ways that it's very much worth having that argument, having that conversation to resolve it. I would say there's a caveat here of only do this with people whose values like directly impact your life, or with people who have the ability to accept new perspective. If they're never going to change, and actually your values, as I say, it's not someone on the internet that you're trying to change their values, that in that case, don't bother. But if it's like these values of money, time, effort, honesty, whatever, are going to pop up in your relationships time and time again, you need to have those arguments. You need to sit down and be like, look, at the root of this thing that we keep arguing about is this. It's a value, and we need to get to the bottom of it. We're going to resolve it. We're going to come on to how we do that in a little bit. But that's my number one. And the second type of argument I think is really worth having is arguments which are alignment based, like future defining arguments. These are actually the ones that I probably have the most arguments with my husband, for sure. It's these kind of like, are we on the same page arguments? And I think they're incredibly important to happen because ultimately they define the next steps. If you don't, let's say you're someone who just runs away from conflict at all costs. If you're working towards different goals, whether that's with family, friends, work, whoever that is, if you're working towards a different goal because fundamentally you have not future defined what you're doing, you're always going to, again, crop into these arguments time and time again because you're not on the same page. You're not like singing from the same hymn sheet, as they say. So I think these ones are incredibly worth having. It could be, where do we want to live? It could be, do we want to have children? It could be, are we saving up for XYZ? Like those things. And again, you might be like, well, they're not really arguments. They can turn into arguments. Let me tell you, especially when, feelings are involved, because everyone's got one life. Everyone wants to achieve whatever they want to achieve in their life. You also have a connection to whoever you're having this argument with. It's easy to feel like, okay, this person's not on the same track as me. And it's easy. I'm so guilty of like getting very triggered by something maybe and being like, oh my God, they don't want what I want. This is a nightmare, catastrophizing. And the only way to get through that is by having the conflict, having the conversation. And ultimately, then you have to just get to a point where you're on the same page. I think those arguments are worth having. Number 3 is accountability fights. I think this is so important to have accountability fights. This is this hurt me and can we address it kind of fight. They're so important because otherwise you leave a lingering air of pain, of guilt, of judgment around a relationship. So those arguments of, you did this thing and it hurt me, and we need to talk about it. We need to resolve this. They're worth having because otherwise someone is left hurt for a really long time. Again, we'll talk into how we address those, but I think they're really, really worth having. And sometimes you feel like, okay, so much time has passed, like I can't have that conversation. You absolutely can. Like you can still have the argument. I'm not saying drag up stuff from the past that's been resolved, but if something has left you hurt and you've never resolved it, it is an argument worth having. And I know when you're listening to this, there will be something in the back of your head that's niggling you and you'll be like, I don't want to do it. Well, you have to. Number 4, I really worked around, I don't know how to phrase this one. It took me a lot of my little strategist brain to work it out. I've called it like equality arguments in your life. So these are things, they could be at work, they could be in your finances, they could be in your house if you're sharing with people. They are dynamics where things feel unequal and there's an equality imbalance. I think those things are worth having. It could be as dramatic as, you know, that the man who works the same job as you, or even a level below you, earns less money than you. That is a fight worth having. If it could be that you know that there's someone in your shared house who does all of the cleaning, maybe you're that person, and nobody else really helps out. That is a equality fight that is worth having. Why are they worth having? Because again, they leave people feeling hurt. There's something which is persistent. They are something which will haunt you if you don't have those arguments. And also they're tied back to your values. So if something is feeling like very unequal in a dynamic, it's worth having that argument, having that fight. So that was the big 4, right? Value-based arguments, future-defining arguments, accountability arguments, equality arguments. Those are the 4. And I said there is one that I throw in because I think it is important, but there is a caveat. Number 4 is friendship maintenance fights. And I say friendships specifically because I think this is where they come up. And this is a fight which is framed around like, I want us to stay connected. Like, I feel like something's changing. I want to stay connected. I want to maintain this friendship. I think those fights are really worth having because friendships are, I've yapped on about 100 different times. Friendships are so fucking important. They are the cornerstone of happiness. I would go as far as to say they're maybe even more important than romantic relationships. They're often the most enduring over your life, and they take a lot of maintenance. Like, they are an active process. It's like, you know, that thing of love is a doing word, like friendship is a doing word. It is something that needs maintaining. So friendship maintenance fights, I think, are really important to have. My caveat is that you have to, if you're doing this too often and you're always saying, I'm fighting for this friendship, and the other person is not reciprocating or interested, then there obviously comes a point where you need to walk away. If you've been having those arguments, I would really recommend to go back to our episode on friendship. It's a weirdly personal episode on friendship. What is it called? Is it Are We Becoming Bad Friends? I can't remember. It's got friendship in the title. It's me talking, and it's all about what makes relationships, friendships specifically, work and what makes friendships not work. So if you're finding that you are in a friendship maintenance fight often, you're saying to your friend, I want to see you more, I want to be more involved, like, I need this from you, maybe go back and listen to that episode because it might help just you understand like where that friendship is at this stage in your life, or where it isn't even in the friendship cycle. So that's number 5. And that's my one with a little caveat. We don't do that one often. If we're doing it often, something is broken. It's not worth arguing about. And ultimately, I want to just say that arguments are often intimacy. Like, healthy conflict is intimacy. If you're avoiding a topic because you cannot cope with the argument or the discussion, you're avoiding a level of intimacy. It's why, like, you know, people say like, oh, you know, siblings, they fight the most, but they love each other the most. And it is because there's a level of honesty that sits underneath arguments and conflict. You don't fight about things you don't care about. Now, that doesn't mean if you're in a relationship where you fight 24/7, that doesn't mean necessarily that they care. They might just love arguing. But if you are going through those steps of like, is this an argument that's worth having? And what do I want to like achieve from this? Is there a conflict that needs resolving? Ultimately, it is because you care. And ultimately, 99% of the time, if you do it properly, hopefully those conflicts bring you closer. And we're going to go into that now. Like, if you're arguing, if you're having conflict, how do we do that in the best way? And as I said at the beginning, better does not mean winning. You can be someone who wins every single argument, and then you look around and you have absolutely no close connections, you have no intimacy. Arguing is about creating understanding and creating change, ultimately. Okay, so let's get into this. How do we have better arguments? How do we resolve conflict in our 30s? The thing to understand is the underlying issue. Most arguments are not to do with the thing that you're arguing about. They are like micro little flames coming off a big fucking bonfire of something underneath. The dishwasher, for example, emptying the dishwasher, emptying the bins, who buys your sister's birthday present, whatever. Those are not arguments that are about that thing. There is something underneath them. There is a feeling underneath them. For example, who empties the dishwasher or who washes the dishes, whatever, is not an argument about dishes, is it? It's an argument about fairness, or it's an argument about feeling supported. The person who's saying, you don't wash the dishes ever, it's not because doing the dishes is the hardest job in the world. It's not. It's because there's a feeling of inequality, of unfairness underneath that. The best way to go into an argument is really to be like, why am I feeling this? Like, what is the feeling underneath this initial explosion or whatever, or initial like niggle that you feel? What is the feeling underneath that? And you have to try and get your ego out of the way and get under the issue. Those might be those under the surface topics. They're probably about unmet needs. They're probably about you are feeling a conflict around something that you need is just not being met in the relationship. I'm going to go through what some of those are because I think it really helps like work out. It's almost like a little, you know, if you memorize them. I can't memorize shit at the moment. Honestly, my brain is like an absolute sieve. But if you did have the capacity beyond a 7.5-month pregnant woman of memory, then you might like look at some of your arguments and be like, yeah, I can kind of sense check against this list of, am I feeling one of them? One of them is around safety. Like the fundamental feeling behind this argument is that you felt unsafe at that point. That could be physically, it could be emotionally. It's more likely to be emotionally, let's be honest. But you felt unsafe, and what they did, the action that they did, or the situation that occurred made you feel unsafe, and therefore you're acting out and you're arguing around it. It could be about belonging, that you felt left out. It's not that you really wanted to go see Wicked 2. I definitely don't want to fucking see Wicked 2. A good one in my own life, okay. Sometimes I didn't have an argument around this, but it's something that went through my mind of, should I bring this up? And the fundamental feeling was a lack of belonging. I felt left out. Obviously, being pregnant, I don't get invited to all the fun things because I'm exhausted. And also, like, let's be honest, if you're going out, getting on it, having some drinks, whatever, you might not want a pregnant lady in tow because the vibe is different. And I completely rationally understand that. I get it. But sometimes, because of a feeling of belonging, you feel a little bit left out. And it might be like, you might then send a shitty text to someone being like, oh, it'd be nice if I'd have been invited. I didn't do that personally, because I'm very aware that like my friends love me and I understand the dynamic. I get that like I'm not in my most fun mode. And I also get that if people invited me to things right now, I probably wouldn't go because I'm fucking exhausted, but I still wanted to be invited. Anyway, that's the feeling. So there might be something that you're wanting to act out on because underneath it you feel left out. Another one is respect. You might be going into arguments because fundamentally you feel like you're not being respected in that moment. That is a huge one for arguments. It could be the way someone said something. It could be the thing that they said itself, the context that it happened in. Sometimes it's a feeling of disrespect, and you really need to be aware, like, okay, that's what I'm feeling disrespected. If you are someone who is anxiously attached, these last two might be really core underlying feelings of some of your arguments. The first one is attention, that you needed more care in that moment. That might be something you really related to, that you're arguing because actually you want that person to be closer. You wanted more care, you wanted more attention, and you didn't feel like you were front of mind when they were doing this behavior or making this decision or acting this way. Actually, you just needed like more attention from them. And the other one that I think really can trigger anxiously attached people is reassurance. So you acted out because you wanted to be reassured, or the thing that has upset you is because you needed more reassurance. I'm very, very guilty of these. I've worked a lot on them in the last 10, 15 years, though that's too generous, 10 years. Not even that, if we're honest. I only really started this stuff in my late 20s. But attention and reassurance have often been underlying some of my arguments, is that I'm actually just like feeling anxious about the relationship and I just need a bit more love and attention. So the whole point of that is really think about what's under the surface of this topic. The dishwasher argument is not about dishes. It's about one of these. It's probably about safety. It's probably about belonging. It could be about respect. It could be about attention. It could be about reassurance. It's something else is driving this argument. So before you go into arguing, or like, I know you don't go into it being like, I'm going to have an argument now. But as you start to go into arguing, like really think like, okay, what is driving this? Like, what am I actually feeling right now? Is this a pattern that I'm seeing and they're connected and it's something different? It's not the thing I'm saying I'm arguing about. There's something deeper to this. If you can align on that, your arguments will be faster. Your conflict resolution will be faster and stronger. Okay, and here are my 6 fundamental beliefs of how to have better arguments. And obviously I did look at research around this, guys. I'm not quoting it like I sometimes do, but I did look into these and I looked into the research of actual conflict resolution, how to make it better. But let's say you've defined what that underlying feeling is and you're in an argument. How do you actually resolve it well and get an outcome? The first thing is you have to name what you actually want. You have to be specific. There are so many people that in an argument, they will dance around what the thing is that they want. Like, I wish you'd thought about me in this moment. I wish, blah, 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 blah. Just say what you want. Like, it's so much easier to, rather than being like, well, he should know what I want. He should know, or she should know what the outcome of this thing is. People aren't fucking mind readers. Like, if you want to argue better, just tell them what you want. Say, hey, that thing you did, it really upset me. And actually what I want you to do is I want you to now book a dinner with all of us because it upset me and that's what I want. And that's what would make me feel better. You're giving someone a clear directive. You're giving them a route to resolve the resolution. Resolve the resolution? That doesn't make sense. You're giving them a route to resolution to resolve the conflict. And I don't want to bash men. Or do I? I do say I love it. But I do think with men, you have to be even more tell them the thing because they don't have the same kind of complex emotional cues that women have. This is not me being a misandrist. This is proven by data. They do not read body language in the same way. They don't have the same emotional complexity of reading other people's relationships in the same way. Be really clear. Don't expect them to be a fucking mind reader. Just tell them, this is what I need from you. This is what would make me feel better. And then also you have a stake in the ground. And I understand that feels scary because it's like, well, what if I do that and then they don't do it? Well, that's your answer. Then you've got knowledge. You've resolved because you've moved forward. But if you don't give someone a way to resolve something, it's really difficult to do it. So be really clear on what you want. The other is this term, which is called kitchen sinking conflicts. I don't know exactly where this came from. It's probably from some horribly misogynistic background of women being at the sink and being bitchy and annoyed. But basically this is when you're in an argument, you don't throw all the arguments of the past into the mix. You can't just throw things that happened months ago, every mistake they've ever done, every annoyance, every resentment. You can't just throw those in the mix. That is not a good way to argue. And I am also incredibly guilty of this. Sometimes when I argue, I do not stay on track. I'll be like, well, this is also an example of this, and this is when you did it, and you did it this time as well. And then it's really overwhelming for the other person. And it's also kind of unfair. It's it goes back to the reason you're arguing. You're not arguing about the fundamental problem, right? You're arguing about the symptom. And when you're arguing about symptom, there's obviously going to be 10 different symptoms that you can link together, but it's not a productive way of arguing. It really overwhelms the other person. It's actually very unfair. It also confuses the point that you actually want. If it's whoa, well, that was a completely different situation, then whew, you're throwing me over here and that's another situation. There's all different conflicts, right? They're different conflicts, different contexts. So you're confusing what you want and therefore the outcome is less likely to happen. And also ultimately it escalates conflict. Once you start throwing in this and this and this, you're not creating resolution, you're creating more conflict. So I really would say when you're arguing, try and stick to one thing. And if there is too many things, then have the discussion about the underlying feeling that links those together, because there will be one. And that might be faster than just arguing about all these different things one by one. I also really want you to think about the conflict style of the person you're having the disagreement with. I think this is often so forgotten. My partner and I have very different conflict styles. Like, because I historically have been more anxiously attached, he's very secure. I'm very much like, I want to argue and argue and argue. I don't do this anymore, to be fair, but when I was younger, especially, argue and argue and argue into the night, that I had to resolve it to some degree before I went to bed. Like, that was my style, is like, I had to be reassured because I was so anxious. I needed that reassurance that, like, we've got through it, everything's fine, before I could stop the conflict. And he's not like that. And actually, a lot of conflicts don't really work like that. Like, sometimes they are big things that you need to work out, you need to research, you need to look into stuff. Like, you know, I'm talking about, let's say you're having an argument about buying a car, you're having an argument about where you want to live, whatever. Those are not things you can just talk through in one night. And his conflict style is very much that he kind of like, he takes it on board. He doesn't say much in the moment. He sort of takes it away and thinks about it, and will come back days later and be like, this is how I feel about it. This is how I think. This is how I think we could resolve it. I think knowing the person you're arguing with conflict style is so important. You might have someone who's incredibly fiery and they're very emotionally volatile. You need to know that with their conflict style. And that doesn't mean they can treat you like shit or whatever. It just means that, you know, actually they need to have their blow up and there needs to be space, or actually they need to have a blow up and you need to say to them, like, this doesn't work for me. But I think thinking about the person that you're arguing with's conflict style will help you like find the mid ground and resolve quicker. Then we have focusing on intention. I think focusing on intention is a nuance which has been incredibly lost in our dynamics of relationships now. People often focus on the exact words that somebody said or the exact thing that they did, and they don't focus on the intention behind it. When you don't focus on intention, you strip away all of that person's character. You strip away everything that you know about them, right? And you make them this kind of like one-dimensional. Well, you said exactly this thing. You didn't use this word. You used this word. And that's where, if you've ever had an argument with someone who does that, like, well, you didn't say exactly that. You said exactly this. Pointless, firstly, and not the best way to argue because you're not going to resolve things. You really need to understand, like, where was that person coming from when they did this? Because sometimes people do things and they genuinely think they're coming from a good place, and that intention, it does matter. And again, it doesn't mean people can treat you badly. I'm not saying like, because you understand where their pain comes from, blah, blah, they can treat you like shit. I'm not saying that. But there is a level of like, hold that person's character in your mind. If that person is not someone who's deceptive, if they're someone who's not unkind, if they're someone who would never purposely leave you out of something, or they would never purposely say something to hurt your feelings, have that intention in mind and go into the conflict with, look, like, I know this is not who you are, this is something you said, or like, just try and not attack in that way that goes after character. I think the minute you shift from, you know, the thing that you did made me feel like you don't love me, or the thing that you did made me feel like I was a last priority, versus you don't love me, versus I'm always your last priority. Very different arguments, very different conflict. You're going to fucking back someone into a corner and their claws are going to come out and they're probably going to get angry. And the minute you get to that, you're not resolving anymore. Again, it's not about being a pushover. It's about the whole point of arguments is to get to resolution, to conflict resolve. So how do we do that in a good way? We take out people's character from things and we really think about what was the intention behind the thing. And sometimes someone's intention can be shit. Like sometimes someone says something and you're like, the only reason you would say that is because you want to hurt me. Know that. When someone shows you who they are, sometimes you don't need to resolve that. Sometimes it's like, I know the only intention you had there was to hurt me. I don't need it in my life. But I think it's incredibly important to take someone's character and someone's intention into how you think about a conflict. Okay, we are nearly wrapping up on this, but the last thing I say, second to last thing actually I'm going to say about conflict resolution, how to do it well, how to have good arguments, is removing your ego where you can, which is incredibly difficult to do. But with that example, like I said before, of, well, you said exactly this, sometimes it's like, it's actually more about control. You're trying to control someone's behavior or someone's language because it makes it more palatable for you, makes you feel safer, whatever. that comes from ego. It's like a need to control the situation. It comes from pain. It comes from ego. And I think if you can try and remove your ego a little bit from the situation, often you will have a better argument. As I said, sometimes it can feel like an argument is about trying to be right. It's about trying to win. I really don't think that mindset is going to serve you. I think there are ways to win arguments by being fucking destructive, and you will win the argument, but you will not win the relationship. If you've identified this is a relationship you want to maintain, this is an argument worth having, then try and remove your ego where you can. Just think like, do I really need to bring up this specific thing? Where is it coming from? And if it's ego driven, maybe leave it out of the conversation. And the last one is choosing the right moment for an argument. Obviously, you don't plan arguments on the whole, right? That's not how the world works. But check your context that you're in. Someone says something at dinner that really offends you. It might not be the right time to straight away jump across the dinner table and say, like, what did you just say? That hurt me. Like, the thing that you said hurt me. Even though it's a valid argument to have, the context of the dinner table might not be the right way to do it. Let's say someone is having a really shit time and they're ranting about their life and they're saying like, this thing's fucked in my life and this thing's fucked in my life and like, and you don't do this and no. Again, probably not the right context to go, oh wait, that was about me. I want to have that argument. That's about me. So I want to do that now. It's probably not the right context. So really think about the right moment for your feedback. I think we could say that arguments are feedback. If the real goal is to conflict resolution, you could say that arguments are a level of feedback and resolution. Think about the right moment. Sometimes it's a text. I think it's very rarely that a text is the right place to have an argument. Sometimes it is, maybe if like there's been a big black hole in the relationship and no one's speaking to each other and you just need to text and be like, look, this thing upset me. I would love to talk about it. Sometimes it's that. Sometimes it's just a, hey, can we have dinner? Can we catch up? I think really think about the moment for feedback, because also your emotions are all over the place, right? Like different contexts are going to make you happier or sadder or more anxious. So think about like what's the best context to have that argument in. And that's it, really. I'm going to recap those because it's nice to have a little recap, isn't it? So if you want to have better arguments, first of all, you're going to try and understand what is the emotion driving this argument. Is it you feel a lack of safety? Is it that you want more attention? Like, try to understand what is the thing beneath the thing, because 90% of the time, the thing that you're arguing about is not the thing you're arguing about. As I said, no one's actually arguing about dishes. It's not a big deal to argue about dishes. To argue about respect in your home is a big deal. Then the ways we're going to get through conflict resolution faster is we're going to name things that you actually want. You're going to give them a way to resolve the conflict. Be specific. You're going to avoid kitchen sinking past conflicts. You're not going to drag up shit from the past and lay it on the table and hit someone with this multitude of different things that they weren't expected. You're going to stick to one thing and be clear. You're going to be aware of the person that you're arguing with conflict style. And the reason you're doing that is not pandering to someone. It's because it's the best way to resolve. You're going to focus on intention, on not control. You can't control what someone said, what they did. You're going to look at the intention behind it and analyze that and talk about that. You're going to remove ego where you can. Easier said than done, but it's a practice and we can all do it. And the last one is we're going to choose the right moment for the feedback. I really hope that this has been useful. I actually don't even know why this topic, of course I do. I didn't know why this topic came up. I talked about it at the beginning because I was arguing with men on the internet. But yeah, there's so many things I could have talked about this week and this just felt very, very fitting. So I want to leave you with some thoughts, a little like reflection to think about maybe. The first one is, what argument are you in out of habit that you could now step away from? So what argument are you having because you've been having it over and over again? It's become a habit. And actually, if you worked through these like 3 steps, you could move away from that and your life would be better. And the second is, what argument have you been avoiding that might actually free you? There will be something. There will be a nitty-gritty something in there. Some people fucking hate conflict. I understand that. But sometimes it's very, very needed and it can actually free you. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you have, I would love it if you sent it to a friend. Honestly, it's like the best way that the podcast grows. Obviously, I love your comments. I love your reviews. I love your ratings. I love it all. But if you can send it to someone who you think might also enjoy the podcast, I would be really, really grateful. And we'll be back next week with more guests. We'll also be back with an update on what we're doing for 2026 once I have birthed, pardon me, I did a little inside burp. Once I have birthed this child from my body. Obviously, unfortunately, I'm not going to be releasing an episode every single week forever. But we are going to have regular episodes, and they're going to be really, really good because they're going to be so planned. So stick around, and I'll speak to you all soon. Thanks for being here. Bye.